Welcome to Cryptid Monologues. Let's dive into a world where myths meet imagination. Here we unravel chilling tales of cryptids, Bigfoot, Wendigos, dogmen, skinwalkers, and more. These stories are crafted to ignite your imagination. These stories are purely fictitious, and names and/or events are purely coincidental. If you like these kind of stories, please give a like and subscribe. Click on the notification bell to stay up to date. Thanks for listening. Let's get into it. The Balancing Act. Despite the weight of her discovery, Elena couldn't forget the reason she had come to Cougar in the first place. Her research on Mount St. Helens post-eruption geology remained unfinished, a looming task she could no longer put off. The region's volcanic activity and the shifting landscape presented a fascinating opportunity to study the forces of nature at work, but the recent events had taken a toll on her focus. The thought of returning to the south side of the mountain gnawed at her. The area was known for its unstable terrain, but the data was essential for understanding the long-term recovery of the ecosystem after the eruption. She had already missed several days of research, and her team back at the university was expecting updates. Marcus and Sarah had both urged her to be cautious, to take time and regroup after their encounter. But Elena knew she couldn't ignore her responsibilities, both scientific and personal. The creature, the mystery of its existence, would have to wait. The next morning, after a restless night of debate, Elena packed her equipment for the south side of Mount St. Helens. The air outside was cold, the mist from the mountain swirling like an ethereal veil. The road was quiet as she drove toward the trailhead, passing through the small town of Cougar, where the morning fog clung to the trees, creating an eerie atmosphere. As she neared the forest entrance, the creature consumed her thoughts. She hadn't shared everything with Marcus and Sarah. There was more she hadn't told them about her encounter. The creature's eyes, the way it seemed to understand her, the warning it had issued. It felt wrong to leave the mystery unresolved, but the work awaited her, and so she pushed the unsettling thoughts aside, focusing instead on the landscape ahead. The road narrowed as she turned off onto the winding trail that led into the heart of the mountain. The dense trees on either side created a canopy so thick that little light penetrated through. Elena gripped the steering wheel, her eyes scanning the woods. The stillness of the forest felt oppressive, as though it were holding its breath. By the time Elena reached the trailhead on the south side of the mountain, the sun had fully risen, casting a pale light over the jagged volcanic landscape. She pulled her car into a small parking area, unloaded her gear, and started her trek into the woods. The air was cool, and the ground was uneven, the volcanic soil still recovering from the eruption. As she made her way deeper into the forest, Elena's scientific mind shifted back into gear. She needed to collect soil samples, measure gas emissions from fumaroles, and document the regrowth of the flora. These were all essential pieces of the puzzle that would help her understand how this ecosystem had begun to recover after the eruption. But even as she focused on her work, the memory of the creature lingered, like an unwelcome shadow. Each time the wind stirred the trees, Elena found herself flinching, half expecting to hear the deep, rumbling growl from the gorge. By mid-afternoon, Elena had reached a plateau that offered a clear view of the southern slopes of Mount St. Helens. She set up her equipment, taking soil samples and documenting the volcanic rock formations. However, as she worked, she noticed small, peculiar signs scattered around her research site, footprints in the soft mud. The prints were large, much larger than any bear's. The shape was odd, too. Elongated toes, a depth that suggested considerable weight, and a stride that was distinctly human in appearance. She frowned and knelt to examine the prints more closely. She couldn't help but wonder if this was another sign of the creature. But there was something else about these prints that unsettled her. They were fresh. She stood up and looked around. The forest felt unnervingly quiet, almost too quiet. The only sound was the rustle of the wind through the trees. Could it have followed her? As the thought crossed her mind, the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She scanned the surrounding forest, her heart pounding. The feeling of being watched washed over her again. Just as Elena began to gather her things, preparing to leave the area, she heard something. A low, sharp sound, not unlike the rustling of a large animal moving through the underbrush. The sound came from the direction of the ridge above her, and it was unmistakably purposeful. Without thinking, Elena took a step back, her pulse quickening. She told herself it was just an animal, perhaps a deer or a bear, but the chill that ran down her spine told her otherwise. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, to retreat to the safety of her car and head back to the cabin. But the scientist in her couldn't ignore the pull of the unknown. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to turn back now, especially after everything she had seen and felt. Taking a deep breath, Elena slowly crouched down and began to pack up her equipment with deliberate care. The sound from the ridge came again, closer this time. She froze. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't anything she'd ever heard before. A sudden crashing noise, followed by a heavy thud, made her heart leap into her throat. She shot a glance over her shoulder. Something or someone was moving swiftly through the trees. But this time, it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a challenge. For the next several minutes, Elena remained as still as possible, holding her breath. Her heart pounded in her chest, and every instinct screamed at her to run. She couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was near, that it was watching her again from the shadows. She felt the ground beneath her shift slightly, as though something massive was moving just out of sight. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the presence vanished. The forest returned to its unnatural quiet. With shaky hands, Elena packed the last of her things and quickly made her way back to the trail. Her mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Her scientific curiosity, her growing fear, the gnawing sense that something far more profound than she could comprehend was unfolding just beneath the surface. By the time she reached her car and drove back to the cabin, the feeling of being watched lingered, clinging to her like a second skin. The mystery wasn't over. A return to the cabin. By the time Elena arrived back at the cabin, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the landscape. The familiar, comforting sight of the rustic wooden structure did little to calm her nerves. Her pulse was still racing, the unsettling presence she'd felt on the mountain clinging to her like a second skin. As she pulled up to the cabin, she saw Marcus and Sarah sitting on the porch, their faces lit by the soft glow of a lantern. They were waiting for her, though neither seemed particularly surprised to see her return so soon. Elena shut off the car engine and stepped out, taking a deep breath as she walked up to the porch. Her legs felt heavy, and every step seemed to take more effort than the last. "You're back early," Marcus said, raising an eyebrow as she approached. Elena nodded, but her mind was elsewhere, still replaying the eerie sounds from the ridge. I found more signs. There are footprints, larger than a bear's, fresh." Sarah's expression shifted from casual to serious. "Fresh?" she asked, leaning forward. "What do you mean?" "I mean, they were recent," Elena said, her voice tight. "I don't know how to explain it, but they were almost human in shape, and there was something else, something I can't quite put my finger on." Marcus and Sarah exchanged a glance, both clearly on edge. "Did you see anything?" Marcus asked, his voice low. Elena hesitated, her thoughts spinning. She wanted to say no, to dismiss the feeling as just nerves or imagination, but she couldn't. "No, but I felt it, like I was being watched." Sarah stood up, her face pale. "We need to go back tomorrow. Get more evidence. If it's not a bear, it's something else. and we need to know what we're dealing with. Elena shook her head, her eyes locked on the ground. I don't think we should. I don't think it's safe. Something's out there, something aware of us. The three of them fell into silence, the weight of Elena's words hanging in the air. The cabin was filled with the soft hum of the portable gas analyzer as Elena spread out her collected data across the wooden table. Soil samples in labeled containers, a notebook filled with detailed sketches of the terrain, and the digital recorder sat among the maps and geological readings. The others, Marcus and Sarah, huddled close, eager to hear more about what she had found on the south side of Mount St. Helens. Elena leaned forward, her fingers tracing the contour lines on the map as she began to recount her experience. When I got to the ridge, everything felt wrong. The air was heavy, like the forest itself was warning me to leave. Then I found these tracks. She held up a photograph of the enormous, human-like footprints pressed into the volcanic soil. Sarah examined the photo, her brow furrowing. These are massive, and they look deliberate, like something walking upright, not an animal. That's not all, Elena continued. She pulled out her notebook and flipped to a page filled with hastily scrawled notes. The seismic readings in the area showed some unusual activity. Small tremors concentrated near a fumarole I was studying. At first, I thought it was just routine geothermal movement, but she hesitated, glancing at the portable analyzer on the table. But what? Marcus pressed, his tone a mix of curiosity and concern. Elena gestured to the device. The gas levels are dangerous. Carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, higher than they should be for this side of the mountain. I ran the numbers twice to be sure. If the concentrations keep rising, it could indicate increased volcanic activity. Sarah's eyes widened. You're saying the mountain might be waking up again? Not necessarily, Elena replied, but something's shifting beneath the surface. The geothermal system isn't stable, and if there's a buildup of pressure... An eruption? Marcus asked, his voice low. Elena nodded grimly. It's a possibility. Maybe not soon, but the signs are there, and if it happens, it could destabilize the entire region. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind visibly churning. So let's say the mountain is gearing up for something. What does that have to do with the creature? Why would it show itself to you now? Elena shook her head. I don't know. But think about it. If it's tied to the land somehow, it might sense the danger. Maybe it's protecting something, or maybe it's just reacting to the changes. Sarah looked thoughtful, her fingers tapping against the edge of the table. The legends say Bigfoot is a guardian of the forest, right? If the mountain's in trouble, it makes sense that it would be more active, more visible. Elena exhaled deeply, rubbing her temples. That's the part I can't get out of my head. It felt like it was warning me, not just to leave, but about something bigger, like it knew what's coming. The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Determined to make sense of her findings, Elena turned her attention back to the data. She pulled up the seismic readings on her laptop, overlaying them with the map of the region. The tremors she had recorded were clustered near the fumarole, but also extended into the area where she had seen the tracks. This doesn't add up, she muttered, mostly to herself. The movement isn't just random, it's concentrated, almost like there's a fracture zone forming. Marcus leaned over her shoulder, studying the screen. Could it be a magma intrusion? Maybe, Elena said. Or it could be a shift in the hydrothermal system. Either way, it's not normal. Sarah's eyes flicked between the map and the footprints in the photo. What if the creature isn't just reacting to the changes? What if it's moving because of them? If the mountain is becoming unstable, it might be displacing them, or whatever's out there. Elena paused, considering the possibility. If it's been living in this region for centuries, any major geological shift could force it out of its habitat. And force it closer to us, Marcus added. As the night wore on, Elena began cross-referencing her data with historical records of Mount St. Helens activity. What she discovered made her blood run cold. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a series of old reports on her laptop. "The fumarole area I studied today was near a fault line that became active just before the 1980 eruption. Increased gas emissions, small tremors, these were all precursors to the big event." Marcus and Sarah leaned in closer, their faces reflecting the same unease Elena felt. "But the activity didn't start until recently," Sarah said, frowning. "What triggered it?" "I don't know," Elena admitted. "But if the gas levels keep rising and the tremors intensify, we could be looking at another eruption, or at least significant geothermal activity." "And the creature?" Marcus asked. Elena looked at him, her expression grim. "If it's connected to the land, it might already know what's coming. And if we don't figure this out, we could all be in danger." The cabin grew quiet again, except for the faint rustle of the wind outside. The lantern on the table flickered, casting shifting shadows across the walls. "Tomorrow," Elena said finally, her voice steady, "we go back to the south side. We need more data on the gas levels, the tremors, and the creature's movements. If this is as big as I think it is, we don't have much time to prepare." Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances, then nodded. But as they prepared for bed, the feeling of unease lingered. The mountain was stirring, and the forest seemed alive with secrets. Somewhere in the darkness, the creature watched and waited, its presence a silent reminder that they were not alone, and that the danger beneath the surface was far greater than any of them had imagined. Into the heart of the mountain. The next morning, Elena, Marcus, and Sarah prepared for their expedition with a quiet sense of urgency. The forest around the cabin was still shrouded in mist as they loaded their equipment into Marcus's truck: seismic sensors, gas analyzers, GPS devices, and survival gear. "This isn't just about the creature anymore," Elena said, her voice steady but tinged with tension. "If the mountain is becoming unstable, we need to figure out how bad it is, and fast." Marcus nodded. "Agreed, but we're not going in blind. We stick together, no wandering off. If we see anything unusual, creature or otherwise, we pull back immediately." Sarah checked the batteries on the handheld radio and gave a firm nod. "Got it. Let's move." The drive to the south side of Mount St. Helens was tense but uneventful. The forest seemed quieter than usual, the stillness almost oppressive. Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, but she didn't mention it. The others likely felt it too. When they reached the trailhead, they parked the truck and began their hike toward the fumarole. The path was rugged and overgrown in places, the terrain marked by jagged volcanic rock and patches of new vegetation. As they approached the fumarole, the air grew noticeably warmer, carrying the faint smell of sulfur. Elena paused to take readings with her portable gas analyzer. "CO2 levels are elevated," she said, frowning at the screen. "And SO2 is higher than yesterday. This isn't normal." Marcus glanced at the analyzer. "Could be a magma intrusion. If the gas is rising, it means pressure is building underground." Sarah crouched near a patch of ground where steam was escaping through a narrow crack. "Look at this." She gestured to the surrounding soil, which was cracked and discolored. "This wasn't here last month. The ground's heating up." Elena knelt beside her, placing a temperature probe into the soil. The reading confirmed Sarah's observation. Temperatures were abnormally high for the area. "This area wasn't on any active watch lists," Elena murmured, her brow furrowed. "If this activity is new, it could mean the hydrothermal system is destabilizing." Marcus scanned the surrounding area with binoculars. "We're close to the ridge, aren't we?" "The place where you saw the tracks," Elena nodded. "Just beyond those trees." The three of them exchanged a glance, and then continued their trek, moving cautiously toward the ridge. When they reached the ridge, Elena immediately recognized the spot where she had found the footprints. The prints themselves were gone, likely obscured by the recent rain, but the area still felt different. The air was heavier, and the ground beneath their feet seemed softer, almost spongy in places. She pulled out her notebook and began comparing her notes from the previous day. This doesn't make sense. The tremors should have been more spread out, but they're concentrated right here. It's like the fault line is shifting directly under this area. Marcus set up a portable seismic sensor, and within minutes it began picking up faint vibrations. Tremor activity is low but consistent, he said, studying the readout. It's like a heartbeat. Something's moving below us. Sarah had wandered a few feet away and was examining the edge of the ridge. Elena, Marcus, come look at this. They joined her and saw what she had found, a series of deep fissures running along the ridge, some wide enough to peer into. Steam wafted from the cracks, and the faint sound of bubbling water echoed from below. This is bad, Elena said, her voice tight. If these fissures are connected to the hydrothermal system, it means the pressure is escaping, but not evenly. That could lead to a sudden release. Marcus looked concerned. A phreatic eruption? Possibly, Elena said. And if the magma is rising too? She didn't finish the thought, but they all understood the implication. As they worked, documenting the fissures and collecting more samples, the forest seemed to close in around them. The stillness was unnerving, and every sound, every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves set them on edge. At one point, Sarah froze mid-step and held up a hand. Did you hear that? They stopped and listened. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind. Then faintly, the low guttural growl Elena had heard the day before. Marcus looked at Elena and Sarah and said, "We're not alone." Elena felt her pulse quicken. "Keep working. We need this data. If it's out there, we're not provoking it. Just stay calm." The growl didn't come again, but the feeling of being watched persisted. As the day wore on, the data they gathered painted a grim picture. Gas levels were continuing to rise, and the seismic activity was increasing in both frequency and intensity. The fissures near the ridge suggested that pressure was building rapidly underground, creating a volatile situation. By late afternoon, Elena had enough information to confirm her fears. If this continues, we're looking at a potential eruption. It might not be catastrophic, but it could still cause massive damage, and it's unpredictable. We need to report this to the Geological Survey as soon as we get back. Marcus and Sarah nodded, but neither looked relieved. The weight of the discovery and the presence in the forest hung over them like a storm cloud. As they packed up their gear and began the hike back to the truck, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were leaving something undone. The creature, the mountain, the signs, it all felt connected, part of a larger story she didn't yet understand. But for now, the immediate danger was clear. The mountain was stirring, and time was running out. Thanks so much from Cryptid Monologues for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. And hey, while you're here, check out these videos. You'll definitely love them. See you in the next one.